I'm going to record the meeting so that if you need to leave for some reason, or some people meant to be here but something came up with this holiday weekend and would like to hear it later, as long as they have the meeting ID and they've been invited, they can access that at a later time. Or if you would like to review it for some reason, it's going to be available the same as the webinars that I'm going to be holding for training. So this is a free introductory, so to tell you a little bit about what I do and how I can help you train to obtain certification as a court interpreter. Basically, that's my goal, to help people train to obtain the certification as a court interpreter. Some of the people interested are already working in court, some are working in other settings, maybe medical interpreter, community interpreter, and would like to be able to work in court. And so the path to certification is through training, and that's where my program would come in, and I hope to be helping a few of you. I've already helped a couple, and now I would like to be able to help more people. So, okay, Catherine can't hear but see the screen, and I got another that said yes, can hear clearly. Miss Villar, I don't know you, I don't have your last name, your first name, but let's see, Catherine, what the problem is. Do you have headphones? Uh-huh. Just a minute. I'm typing for Catherine, who cannot hear me, and we'll start in a minute. I want to make sure everybody's on. I suspect Catherine's problem may be with her own settings. And I apologize. I have my doggy with me that I'm not going to have on the regular sessions, but unfortunately today I have him with me on the couch, and I'm hoping he will stop. But there's construction across the street, and he's hearing noises and he's reacting to that. But I'm sure he'll calm down in a minute. It's too hot to close the windows too. Okay. Let's see, Catherine. You please give me a can you hear me now, Catherine? Give me a signal. The screen is on and my audio is on, and I understand other people can hear me. So we have one person that's having difficulty hearing. Just please hold a second, see if we can solve that. Another way to join the meeting would be by phone, and maybe I'm going to suggest that to the person who can't hear. Maybe join by phone and see the screen would be a combination. Okay. Okay. Catherine says can't hear me or anyone else. It's only me talking, so you should be able to hear only me. I'm not opening all the microphones, and I won't do that during the teaching sessions because it won't help to hear everybody interpreting at the same time. It will only confuse you. You would have to hear the feed and interpret and hear just the feed and yourself, not other people. The rest, can the rest hear me? Please say hi, whoever is there. I don't know what's wrong with that. Attendee can. Let me see if I can get the access. Catherine says, do I need to down? Okay. Okay. Catherine is asking if she needs to download anything. Did you download the program? Because I don't think it's necessary. The link should allow you to participate directly, but you would have to have a good audio on your computer to receive. I don't know what your settings are. In any event, I am recording, and so that you can also hear later. I don't want to delay it much, but I do want Catherine to be able to participate. Okay. Catherine, there's okay, I'm going to share your comment here. I don't know if everybody can see everybody's chat, but this is from another participant. I'm sharing the response, and I'm typing for Catherine who can't hear. And thank you for sharing. So it's just opening the invitation is what I said. There's the link, and the system prompts you to check the system, the sound, the initial sound. I have the same in my end. I don't know what other people have as settings. That's my problem. A ver. Now, I'm looking for the invitation by phone. I'm sorry, I'm not so familiar with that. There's a phone number you can call and give the meeting ID, and the meeting ID is 238-635-237. I am trying to get that 800 number. Just a second. No, it's not here. My gosh, I'm so sorry. Still working, trying to get Catherine in. Okay, my audio is my computer audio. I don't have anything else, but the computer audio I'm using Realtek high definition. Okay, Catherine. Okay. Catherine is going to close and open again to see if she can get in. Okay. Good. Hello, Catherine. Can you hear me? I can see you just arrived. I want to know if you can hear me so we can start. Please type. You don't need to be talking. Very good. Great. Great. Catherine is in. So we're starting. I think everybody's on. Okay. And I don't need to be hearing you. You need to be hearing me. So now I hear some interference. You don't need to have your microphone open. I see. Yes, I see, Catherine. I have you with your microphone on. If you can turn it off,
Oh
then
dear.
okay. I see your mic is on. If you can turn it off, so you can hear me and there's no feedback. Thank you. And now you should be able to hear me and see the screen. Okay? Okay. Very good. So we'll be starting with the presentation. As I said, this is an introduction to the Court Interpreter Training Program online. I propose to do it in a 9-month period for some people. For some people it may be 3 months. For some people it may be less. There's a possibility of doing it intensively. Some people are sitting for the exam soon. And so I also propose a 2-week program intensive for exam preparation. But ideally, you would like to train over a period of time to give you the ample opportunity to practice so that you get to the exam date fully prepared and with that muscle memory acquired to be able to interpret fluidly and without interruptions and completely. And that takes time, practice time. So my idea is to do seminars weekly where we would practice the modes of interpretation and different scenarios with a progressive level of difficulty until you get to the advanced level by which you would have covered everything necessary to do that, to sit for the test. I am talking about the certification test because I assume most people who are interested in this program are interested in training in order to become certified as court interpreters. So that's the goal. If you don't want to work in court and want to train as an interpreter anyway and work in other settings, this will be useful as well. Of course, court is the highest, I would say, level. If you want to do a community interpreting, of course, this will help you too, and you wouldn't need probably as much, because in community interpreting you would not need to do simultaneous interpretation. It's mostly consecutive. You have your time. There's a little bit less at stake than in court, and so you can you have a little bit of room to wiggle a little bit. So but my goal is to train people for court interpreting, to get the certification as a court interpreter in state court. I work in the state of Maryland and have been certified for 17 years in the state of Maryland. After certifying for the state of Maryland and working in Maryland courts for a few years, then I took a couple other exams. I certified in New York, which at the moment was not part of the consortium and had a different exam. And I did that not because I was moving to New York. I was really training and training in order to get to my next level of certification, which was the federal. So it was kind of a practice exam for me, which was good. I passed, and so I got that other certification, which in fact never used, because really work in New York, but with the federal certification later I obtained in 2008. So I also work in federal court, and now I work as staff court interpreter in the state of Maryland, and I also do some freelance work. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next slide and tell you a little bit of what what the program comprises. I need to get rid of this pen here and move the slides. I'm sorry. Okay, this pen doesn't want to leave me. Sorry. Okay, 1 second, please. I don't want to end the meeting. I just want to switch the slides and I'm stuck with this pen for some reason. I apologize. Okay. So talking about the different interpreter types, there's community interpreter. I suspect some of you may work as community interpreters doing medical interpretation, social work interpreting, etc. Then there's court interpreter that works in court settings, not just in court, interpreting trials, civil, criminal, traffic, etc., which having certification would allow you to do, but also in court-related settings. Yes, we are on the next screen. So, for example, depositions, where you meet at a lawyer's office and somebody is being deposed. Okay, now you can't see the screen. All right, let me see what's wrong. My screen. Okay. Okay, can you see it now? Okay, very good. Apparently something interfered with the screen. Very good. Sorry, now you're seeing the screen. I'm going to continue then. As I was saying, different types of interpreting, community interpreter we just discussed, court interpreter, which will hope you train for, works in court, but not just in court, but also in court-related events. That is, events that take place outside the courtroom, but are later used in the courtroom or have an impact in the courtroom proceedings. For example, as court-related, we have deposition. I see something is blocking my screen here. Screen is paused again. I'm sorry. I need to close other screens here. Okay. Ay, 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 I don't know why. I apologize with the screen. Something is interfering with my screen. No one sees my screen. Why? Okay. All right. Now I think everybody's seeing the screen now. I will take care of this. Apparently some things pop up automatically in my computer and they block the screen because something else gets on top. Okay. As I was saying, court interpreters work not only in court proceedings like hearings, trials, civil, criminal, etc., but also in court-related events that do have an effect on court proceedings. For example, depositions, jail visits, preparation for trial with attorneys, attorneys for one party or the other, or sometimes with the DOJ, the Department of Justice, prosecution in the investigation of cases that are going to court. So in events pre-trial, in preparation for a case that's going to trial, there are interviews, there are investigations, there are evaluations done by social services, sometimes psychological, sometimes competence evaluations, different things that take place outside the courtroom but then are used in the courtroom for a trial or for hearing. And so we need to use certified interpreters for that as well, because it's very important that the interpretation is correct, accurate, and certified so that it can be used in court. So if a deposition is taken at a lawyer's office, it seems a more informal setting, but in fact it's just the same as in the courtroom. You are sworn, you're under oath as an interpreter to interpret faithfully, completely, and accurately. The witnesses are under oath to tell the truth. There's a court reporter taking note of everything that's being said in that deposition, and then a transcript is produced, and that transcript and sometimes it's a video, so videographer sometimes also recording, documenting that deposition, and that gets presented at trial later, and sometimes not, because sometimes they come to a settlement before trial because of all the depositions taken. They come to some kind of agreement once they know what the evidence is. But depositions and the witness testimony that is taken at deposition is just as important as the witness testimony on the stand in a trial or in a hearing. So same court certified interpreter should be used for those. And you get hired to do that once you're certified, because once you're certified, you're put on the list of certified interpreters in the state, and the attorneys or the agencies or the companies that do depositions, sometimes there are companies that do transcripts and they contract the videographer, the stenographer, the court reporter, the court interpreter, etc. So the lawyers would go to one of these agencies and set it up, and they sometimes would hire the interpreter, sometimes the lawyer for one party or the other, whoever is deposing the witness, will contract with you directly. But in order to get those contracts, you have to be on the list of certified interpreters. Okay, so those are different settings in which court interpreters work. And then another level of interpretation is conference interpretation. Conference interpreter would interpret in international meetings, business meetings, type of international meetings, UN, State Department, etc., and mostly simultaneous. The Department of State also uses what's called escort interpreter, apart from simultaneous interpreters or conference interpreters for people who are visiting, dignitaries who are visiting and go to different meetings. So they accompany the person and interpret consecutively. So that's one level. The next level is the seminar interpreter, conference interpreter for the State Department. So that's another level. Some of the court interpreters also pursue conference interpretation, but it's a completely different setting, and most of that is done simultaneously, and it's a different training that you need. So going back to a court interpreter, what is a court interpreter? Well, in my opinion, a court interpreter is not somebody that gets called because he or she speaks a second language apart from English, Spanish, Italian, Japanese, whatever the language is required. Of course, you have to speak the second language and speak it fluently, but you have to be trained to become a professional. There's a requirement of certification for some languages and not for others. That doesn't mean that certification is not necessary. What it means is that in some languages, because there's not much demand and it's very expensive um, to produce these tests and to prepare the program, the state nationwide, the tests have not been prepared for many languages for which there's not enough demand or enough resources. But for Spanish, I would say it is a requirement, although in the state of Maryland and some other states there are actually two lists, a list of certified interpreters and a list of eligible interpreters. And in other states they call them by different names, um, other than certified, qualified, etc. And those are people that work as interpreters but and have attended some workshop orientation, in some cases have passed a written exam and are considered to be eligible to take the test. So will be invited to sit for the certification exam. In the meantime, they are put in the eligible list, kind of the waiting list to be certified. And in the meantime, sometimes they get called to interpret in court. Um, Very few get called to interpret in court in Spanish without certification, or they get called if no certified interpreter is available. And that's because we have enough certified court interpreters in Spanish who have proven they can do the job and have experience in the job, and there's no reason to call people who are not certified, who have different levels of ability and very little experience. Now, in other languages, unfortunately, they have to call people to interpret in court that have invested some other way without a certification. But I would say the goal should be for everybody to certify to work in court, and then you can work frequently and in different hearings, not just simple hearings when somebody else is not available, not just traffic, but you can move on from simple hearings to complex things as trials. The problem is that when somebody gets called without certification or training and then gets stuck in the situation where they're called for a trial and they're not prepared, or for a serious hearing, where they don't have the ability really to interpret completely and faithfully, and then things are missed, and that has serious consequences. And unfortunately, some people just dive in the pool without checking if there's enough water. Well, you're going to hit your head, and it's a problem. And unfortunately, there are consequences for the people involved and also for that interpreter. And it's a bad situation because people get then discouraged. They thought they could do it. They have good intentions. They get caught in a situation where they can't really perform. And then unfortunately, things go wrong, and get a bad reputation. You don't get called again. So I suggest first to train and then to try when you are sure you can do it. And it's very important to be confident when you're doing this, because you're interpreting testimony. A person is believed or not believed according to the way the testimony is presented. And if you have an impact on whether the witness is believed or not believed because of your ability to interpret, then you're interfering with justice. So that's a very serious thing, and that's why they administer the oath to the interpreter before every proceeding. We're under oath to interpret faithfully, completely, and impartially. And faithfully means you understand everything, and you're going to render exactly what you hear into the other language. Um, if your ability doesn't allow you to do that, then you shouldn't be doing it, and you shouldn't take the oath, and you shouldn't be there. And if you see there's an impediment to your performing to those standards, you should let the judge know. There's an obligation to do that under the Code of Ethics. So, which of course, if you haven't trained, you don't know what it is, but we'll cover that in the training program. So, okay, certification is a requirement. In my opinion, it's not a requirement in all the languages, because in some languages there is no test. But definitely there's a test for Spanish, and it is offered often enough that there's really no excuse for not sitting for the test if you're prepared. So the test guarantees, if you pass, that you have the minimum that it takes to practice. So it guarantees a minimum standard of practice. You pass the test with a 70% score or 80% score. That means there's room for a 20% mistake. So that's why I say that's the minimum standard to practice. And you will improve with time. So of course we all make mistakes, and there is a little bit of room for mistake. And I say a little bit. We have the obligation to correct the record when we notice there's a mistake. And if you are trained, you would learn how to do that, so that it is clear whose mistake it is and what's the correct thing that should have been said if it wasn't said correctly. So another thing that I wanted to cover is what's a bilingual versus a professional. If you read my website, I say for court interpreter level 1, the requirement is that you be bilingual before starting the training. If you're not really bilingual, you can't think of working as a court interpreter. So you have to be bilingual, but that's requirement number 1. It's not the end of it. Once you're bilingual, you train on how to interpret to become a professional interpreter. And so what it means to be bilingual, it means that you can go from one language to the other with almost an equal level of confidence, because you will be required to use the two languages almost simultaneously, when you're interpreting simultaneously. And when you're interpreting consecutively, you hear one language, you have to interpret everything that you heard, so you have to understand the concept very well, very fast, to render it immediately into the other language with the same level of confidence and register. So if you have some knowledge of the foreign language, and you say you took 3 courses or 4 courses or 5 courses, and you can manage when you travel abroad, and you can speak the foreign language in social settings, but you cannot speak with a lawyer or with a judge, or interpret a police interview at the same level as you would do it in your native language, then you cannot interpret, because interpreting means going from one language to the other with the same level of competence. So to start with, you have to be bilingual. If you are not bilingual, then you have to train into whatever language is your second language till you acquire that level of competence that allows you to go from one to the other with ease, without having to stop to think, well, is that feminine, is that masculine, how do I make the agreement, and thinking of the rules of grammar. You have to be able to speak fluently in both languages, and basically automatically as second nature, as you speak your first. Obviously, you will have one language that's better than the other. We all have a first and a second language. English is my second language. So you will hear that I speak English with an accent. Well, I speak Spanish with an accent too. It's an accent from Argentina. And people speak English with accents from the Northeast, the Northwest, New York accent, Alabama accent, they're all different. British English, Australian, they all speak with different accents. The accent is not the thing, but you do have to train to understand people speaking Spanish or whatever foreign language is with different accents, because people come from different regions. Even in the same country, they speak with different accents, and we have to be able to understand them to interpret. So that takes trained bilingual person to keep listening and reading in the second language constantly. I never stop learning. So after you acquire some training, you can sit for the certification. So to be certified means that you have passed the test. And to pass the test, you have to prove that you can interpret into different modes. So first you prepare for the test, you practice the different modes of interpretation, and the test consists of, I believe it's 5 sessions now. The sessions test consecutive interpretation into Spanish and into English, simultaneous interpretation, and that also has to be in both directions, although most of the time we work simultaneous interpreting into the foreign language, because it is when the attorneys, the judges, and the witnesses are speaking English that we're interpreting simultaneously the whole proceeding, usually for a defendant. It may be for a victim, it may be for a witness that is a victim and has the right to hear everything that's going on. Most of the times we're interpreting in court simultaneously the whole proceeding for the defendant, because he or she has the right to participate in the proceeding and help in his own defense, in order to be able to help his lawyer for his defense, or her lawyer, of course. I hate doing his, her, but I'm using a generic, I'm using the masculine in a generic, um, in a general sense, not meaning that all defendants are male. So if the defendant has the right to be present during the proceeding, to hear his accusers, to hear everything that's being said, to hear all the witnesses, and to be able to help his lawyer in his defense. So in order to be able to do that, a person who doesn't speak English or doesn't speak English well, that's what we call limited English speakers or limited English proficiency person. So the person understands some English, but not enough to understand everything. And the person has to understand everything in order to meaningfully help his attorney in his defense. So we interpret everything simultaneously for the defendant. And so that usually goes into the second language. But we also have to interpret simultaneously into English. Sometimes a witness is on the stand, and we're interpreting consecutively, because the record has to be clear. So there's question interpretation, answer interpretation. But in the middle of the question and answer, the lawyers object. And then there is a discussion about the objection. And that all happens very fast, and they're not stopping for the interpretation because they don't care. They are not waiting for an answer in Spanish or the foreign language. So the attorneys and the lawyers keep carrying on discussing the reason for the objection. And if you're interpreting for the defendant, he has to hear all that. And so you have to quickly be able to change and interpret into Spanish for the defendant simultaneously. But vice versa, a witness on the stand or somebody in the gallery may start saying something, and although they're not allowed or they're not supposed to be allowed, you have to simultaneously interpret into English for all the participants in the court. So there is a requirement to interpret into English simultaneously too, and also in deposition. It happens very often that in the middle of the questioning, then the lawyer starts speaking among themselves, or witness and his wife, partner, whatever, whoever else is there starts speaking Spanish between them. And so you need to interpret that to the rest of the participants into English, because it's part of the hearing. Okay, so apart from learning the modes of interpretation, consecutive into English and into Spanish, simultaneous in both directions, sight interpretation, that is the interpretation of documents. Sometimes something is introduced into evidence in writing and it's in a foreign language. This should not happen. It should have been translated before it's been introduced into evidence, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes maybe text messages, maybe something that came up the last minute, and so you are asked to read that into English. So it's from the written to the oral. That's called sight interpretation or sight translation, so it's a hybrid between interpretation and translation. And so we're called to do that in court, and also sometimes out of court. People are given, I don't know, some forms or some instructions about probation or whatnot, and the attorney or the judge will say, can you go over this with the defendant? And you don't do it by yourself, you do it with the attorney, or the attorney is explaining an indictment or something. And so you are reading from the document into the foreign language. So that's sight interpretation. So apart from learning these modes of interpretation, which is the meat of the course and what you need to prove that you can do in order to interpret in court and to gain the certification, you also have to cover some theory and some ethics. The rules of ethics are in the interpreter manual in state court. You can look them up. I will cover them briefly in the course. Most of my course will deal with practice though, because anybody can read the theory and we can discuss it in the question and answer session. We don't need to spend much time in things that you can read by yourself, but I would like to cover it and answer questions and different scenarios of ethics that will present themselves when you're interpreting in court. Okay, in order to sit for the exam, it's a process. First you have to enroll. To enroll, you submit an application in state court. The exam that's being administered now in almost all the country, I would say now practically all the states are member of the National Center for State Courts, and so the exam is the same in different places, although in some places, some states, they require a different level to pass. I'm sorry. So there are people that would sit for the exam. I'm saying I'm not, this is not factually true, but to give an example, say Delaware requires 70% to pass, and Maryland requires an 80%, or Maryland requires a 70% and Delaware is 60%. So some people would go and sit for the exam in Maryland and also in Delaware, and maybe they don't make the 70%, but they made a 60% in Delaware, and they get a certification, and you know, with a lower requirement, because in some states they require less because they have higher demand or fewer people that can do it. So the level is not the same in all the states, but the exam is the same. So once you sit, you register. In order to register, you have to go to the judiciary page. In Maryland, it's Maryland Judiciary. Other states, something similar. And there is a section called Court Interpreting Program. It's usually under Language Access, but just type Court Interpreting Program, Maryland Judiciary Court Interpreting Program, to give you the example of Maryland. Same for other states. And you will find there the dates and the requirements. So you enroll, you submit the application, then you'll be told when's the orientation program and what the dates are for the exam. Believe there's what's called the OPI, or a performance, and there's a written portion too. So people who pass the initial requirement of the oral interview sit for the orientation workshop, and so meet the initial requirements, are then put in the eligible list, and then are invited to sit for the exam. So, but first things first, you start by enrolling. So once you enroll in that, or before or after, doesn't matter really, you want to start training, I propose starting with beginner level, but if you already have experience and have been working as an interpreter and have experience, you don't think you need to start by the beginner level, you can start by level 2. The thing is, my program is designed to go from the beginner level, people with no experience or training in interpretation, but that are bilingual, remember, and we're going to start covering the basics of court interpreting, the practice modes, and we'll start interpreting shorter, simpler passages, and then increasingly advance to longer and more difficult passages. We'll cover the core protocol and code of ethics of professional interpreters, and we'll deal with examples of hearings usually heard in district court, workers' compensation, traffic court, misdemeanors. That is what you normally interpret when you start. It's a good way to gain practice and confidence to start with the easier hearings. And I put there a note that full command of English and Spanish is required to begin. We discussed that already. Court interpreting 2 is the intermediate level, and so that is designed for people who already have experience interpreting or have completed level 1. And so in this course we will do civil cases, longer hearings, criminal cases, and bench trial. That's a trial in front of the judge, which are normally shorter, less involved than the jury trials. And we will practice all modes of interpretation again in slightly more difficult, complex cases. So the complexity increases with each level. Court Interpreter 3 is the advanced level. So each of these levels that I'm calling beginner, intermediate, and advanced, so 1, 2, 3, are going to be covered in a 12-week program. So that's why I say you can train really to become an interpreter in less than a year if you start with that bilingual level. Do 3 months, 3 months, 3 months for beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So it's 12 weekly sessions for each level, and that is not all. I expect that in between the weekly seminars where we will practice, you will practice at home every day what we've covered in the course and some homework. So the idea is that you gain the practice. This is based on your ability. So can teach the theory and give you tips and correct the interpreter, but the practice is whatever time you put into practicing and whatever ability you have that will become better with practice, of course. So you have to do the practice and invest the time into practicing frequently. I would suggest every day. So for those who have completed Court Interpreting 1 and Court Interpreting 2, or have advanced knowledge of court interpreting, it's level 3, and there are some people that are already certified that would do this level as a refresher and for skills building. We are required as court interpreters to do continuing education, and doesn't matter how many years of experience you have. I have 17 years of experience and I'm still taking continuing education and attending workshops with the National Association of Judicial Interpreters, sometimes with the AOC in Maryland. Whenever they offer courses, workshops, I attend, or I try to attend as much as I can. There's a requirement to do 16 hours every 2 years to keep the certification. And apart from the requirement, before the requirement existed, I've always done it because I firmly believe you never stop learning and you need to keep practicing all the time. And I learn a lot from my colleagues. So in this level, we'll cover complex cases, interpreting trials by judge or jury. Different parts of jury trials will be interpreting, and we will be interpreting expert witness testimony as well. And we'll deal with team interpreting. That's interpreting with a colleague, which is needed for trials or for long hearings. So we'll deal with how you do that and the proper way of working with a colleague in team interpreting. And as I said, expert witness in trials, you have to interpret all sorts of things. So people sometimes think, well, to become a court interpreter, you just need to be bilingual and learn some legal jargon. Well, of course, you need to learn the legal jargon. You need to learn the concepts. So if you don't understand the concept, it's very hard to interpret simultaneously when you can understand the concept. Interpreting is not going word by word. Interpreting is interpreting concept by concept, rendering into the other language. So yes, we have to understand the jargon, the legal concepts, but that's only some of it. We really have to, to have a command of the language at college level to be able to interpret any topic, I mean, because when you have expert witnesses, yes, they're going to speak about, there's usually firearms experts when there's murders and arms are involved. There's DNA experts, there's scientific experts, there's investigators. There are experts on God knows how many fields. And of course, you can't know everything about everything, but once you know what the trial is about that you're about to interpret, you need to research a little bit on the topic so that you have that vocabulary at the tip of the tongue. And so for that, you have to have the ability to acquire that new vocabulary or that jargon easily. And same when you interpret for conferences. You find out what the conference is about and you research and study that. So it's not only legal, it's legal and everything else, scientific, and basically any topic can come up in court. And also, we have to be able to interpret people that speak at a very low level of competence in their own language. Sometimes many times we have people with very low level of education, and they may speak what you would say is not grammatical English or grammatical Spanish, or they use a lot of slang, and you may say it's proper, it's not proper, it's wrong, it's right, it's grammatically correct or not. Doesn't matter. People say it, and you hear it, and you're the interpret. You have to render it as you hear it. And you can add, you can omit, you can change it, you can make it prettier. If you hear something bad, slang, wrongly spoken, or bad language, you have to render it into the other language. So you also have to have a good knowledge of slang, and that keeps changing. You have to train your ear to understand people with different accents, and you have to be constantly reading and hearing people who speak with different accents, so that when they are understand and you're interpreting them, you can render their testimony exactly as you hear it, and not as you think it should be, or improving it for the sake of the listeners. The listeners, the jurors, the judge have to hear that person through the interpretation as if there was no interpretation. It has to be a proper rendition, a faithful rendition of what the person said. So that includes colorful language, slang, proper and improper grammar, I mean, all sorts of manners of speech. So when you're interpreting, it's very important to interpret it faithfully. And in order to do that, you have to respect the register, the level of speech the person is using. So it's a lot to learn. Okay, and we're coming to the end. Just a little note. We talk about CEUs, continuing education units. That's a requirement for interpreters who are already certified to keep the certification. ATA requires that also of interpreters of translators that are certified, and the American Translators Association has approved each of these courses, each of these levels for 10 CEUs, which is the maximum, although it's actually 12 hours or more because it's 1 hour per session plus a question and answer, which is up to half hour. Sometimes it may be 15 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour, depends on the questions, but the credit is for the teaching hour, and there's a maximum of 10 per course. That's for the ATA. If any of you is certified with the ATA, American Translators Association, so this course will give you the CEUs you require, and we're hoping Maryland and other states will also approve the courses for continuing education requirements. And some of my colleagues would also like to take level 2 or level 3 as a refresher to obtain the CEUs and do it online rather than travel on site to the AOC or to wherever they are giving them, which is what I used to do before I became certified, and I still do. I travel for conferences. So that brings us to the end of my presentation, and I will open it up for questions. I suggest you type the questions so we're not overlapping, and I will be answering the questions as I get them. So please use the chat at the right side of the screen to ask your questions, and if you have any feedback, I'd be happy to hear it too. Okay, I see there's a question. Let me get to that. I need to open my chat. Okay, Catherine is asking, she said, you said we need to practice each day, so do you give the material for that? Yes, I will give you the material. So we will cover material during the session, and I would expect that you would review that and practice that again and again at home. And I will give you extra material similar to what we've done during the webinar, so that you will have some new material to practice during the week as well. And so, yes, you will have the material covering the lesson. You will have the recording that you can go back to, and I will upload and make accessible to you material similar to the one dealt with in class every week. I hope I answered your question. I'm waiting for the next question. Okay. You said you will pass with 70 or 80. Why? There are two different scores. Well, that's up to the states. Different states have different requirements. And I have to tell you, though, also the For the federal, for example, a lot of people are certified in the state and have tried the federal many times and do not pass it. The requirement is higher. But that is up to each state, and I believe it is based on their need to cover their cases, their caseload, and the availability of qualified people in their state. So think Maryland, Virginia, DC have more interpreters. They have higher demand, but they also have higher offer of people who are qualified. And as you go to states with less population or less population of with bilingual training, then they lower the requirements. Just they need to satisfy their need, but it's up to each state, and you would have to check in their court interpreter program page what the requirement is in each state. Can you talk about how much salaries are for court interpreters? Well, it's really that's like a taboo question. If you go to any of the forums of the interpreters associations, there's usually people asking how much do you charge, how much should I charge. We really are not allowed to discuss that because we cannot we cannot pressure people to require a certain fee. Most of us work as freelancers. Now the states have their set rates for court interpreting. So when you're called to interpret in the state of Maryland, those rates are published. You're paid per hour. The rates are published on their site and depends on whether you are eligible or certified. The certified rate is $55 per hour in the state of Maryland. I look up in other states. It's a little bit higher in Virginia, but the state of Maryland is 55 per hour with a minimum of 2 hours. And for non-certified or eligible interpreters, it's 30 or 35. I'm not sure. I think it's 30. And the minimum is 2 hours. They also pay you for travel, time, and mileage if you are going more than 30 miles. So those are set rates that the state determines for people that are court appointed to interpret in court. But as freelancers, we set our own fees when we work for attorneys, when we work outside the courtroom. If you're called for a deposition, if you're called from an agency or by a lawyer, they will ask you, how much do you charge? And that's what I cannot tell you, and we cannot discuss it publicly, and we cannot, collude to set a rate. So some people would charge the same as they are paid to go to court. I would charge more because the court hires me often and those are set rates they establish. If I'm going to work somewhere else or go farther or take half my day, I say my rate should be at least a half a day. In Maryland, and some agencies say, well, we pay a minimum of 2, but you can say, well, I charge 50 per hour, I charge 60, I charge 70, it's up to you. And, whatever you negotiate. And as far as salaries, there are very few people on salary, and I am one of them. But it's very difficult to get a salaried position. As a matter of fact, I would like to get one in federal court, and there's no such position in the state where I live. So in order for me to get one of those, I would have to move to Texas or to Florida or to New Mexico, one of the border states where they have high volume and they offer those positions. In Maryland, they have 0 positions for salary interpreters in federal court, so that's why I'm working as a staff interpreter in state court, although I have a higher certification. because I decided after 15 years of practice that I wanted a staff position for the benefits. Basically, I tell you, I enjoy a little bit more working freelance because I could pick after a few years. You pick where you work, where you want to work, and how much you charge, except in court they set the rates, but you can say, well, I go to this one and not to the other, or I go to the one that's closer, or I go to the one that's farther because they guarantee me a half a day or a full day. So when I was freelancing, I would go sometimes to DC or Virginia and work full day there rather than work for 2 hours around the corner. So, but it's up to you what you take. As a freelancer, you decide you accept or you don't. You do have no obligation to accept, and you set your rates. How often can a state certified worker expect to work in Maryland? I suppose you mean a state certified interpreter. Well, yes, Catherine, I understand. Um, you know, like in everything else, you need to get established to be called often, and it depends how much effort you put and how much you're willing to travel sometimes. It's not that you get certified and you immediately get your calendar full, but as you get certified and you get on the list, they call you from one place, you do a good job, they call you again, and then somebody needs an interpreter in another court, and somebody saw you work there in, say, in Annapolis, and they say they need somebody in Towson, and a colleague or an attorney or somebody will say, oh, there's this person that I work with. And so the coordinators in each different courthouse will start knowing you as long as you start accepting jobs and as long as you do a good job, they will call you again and they will refer you and they will call you more. It takes a little time to get established, but really that varies from person to person. I mean, I can't tell you how often. I decided to work all over the state. No, when I started, I'm not being truthful here. When I started, I was still teaching, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to give up teaching to become an interpreter full time because I was kind of testing the waters. So I started as an eligible. The next year, I got my certification. And in the beginning, I would not give up my students and my business. I had a language school actually. So I would interpret occasionally when they call me from Towson, from the area where I live, or Baltimore, where it was close enough. And I could do, say, the morning and in the afternoon do my other job or vice versa. So I started the first year like that. And then as they called me more, I decided I like it. I quit teaching and work full time as a freelance interpreter. Um, so yes, I had something else to fall back on. As I said, it was a transition, and I did it at my pace. I trained a friend who's now certified, and I started training her and a couple other friends um, because she was my friend. And of the three friends, two decided to take the test. The other one decided it was too much work and didn't want to quit teaching. It wasn't what she liked. But she trained for a while with us, and then she decided, well, it was too much. But the other two, one got certified fairly soon after training, but then she was teaching, because we were all teachers. And she just couldn't quit the other thing to get to start interpreting because every time she was called, she would have to cancel her class or rearrange things to do a 2 hour here, 2 hour there. So she took a long time. Now she finally decided to do it full time, and she's happy she did. I wish she had done it earlier because when I certified for federal court, I could have referred her a lot of work. And when I couldn't do it, I would say, well, I can't do it, but I that's what happens when you start getting known by not only the coordinators but your friends and colleagues, and you work in teams, people like working with you, they will also refer you and you will refer other people. You say somebody calls you and you say, well, I'm not available. And sometimes they actually do know somebody, or sometimes you'll say, well, I know that, Xiomara got a case canceled, so call her. I think she's available. And, that's how you get established. For me, the recommendations of colleagues are very important. So I would have recommended my friend earlier if she had more availability, but she wasn't ready to quit the other job. She didn't feel secure enough to, because really you don't know how often you're going to be called. And so it takes time to get established. As I said, well, she took much longer time than I did because she wasn't ready to quit the other, but now she's an established interpreter and she works very often in court, and oftentimes I call or I refer and she's busy already. So it took her longer, but now she has a full calendar. I can't really tell you how long. And also depends how willing you are to travel, because when you are put on the list, they ask you where you want to work. And so some people just put my county, our county, Baltimore County, whatever, and they don't want to travel. I put all the state, and I did sometimes drive an hour or 40 minutes. They pay me for that, and if it's more than 30 miles, they pay you time as well, and time is at half the rate. So say my rate is 55 as a certified interpreter, for traveling is 27.50. So I would rather go to jurisdiction that's a little over 30 miles, cross the bridge, and instead of working 2 hours, or even if I work 2 hours, I get paid for, because with the travel and the mileage, instead of going 28 miles, which takes me about the same time with traffic going the direction towards DC, but I don't get paid for travel and I don't get, so it literally takes me about a half a day anyway, and I only get paid 2 hours. I'd rather go farther. Takes me 20 minutes longer, 15 minutes longer, but I'm compensated for the half day basically. So it's your choice. But there are many possibilities. I'm sorry, answer the question about reciprocity. Let me go back. I missed that one. Okay, don't states have reciprocity agreements? Yes. Yes, they do. That's why people test in one state. They don't have to test in different states. The exam is the National Center for States Court exam, is the consortium exam, and so it's accepted in all the states that are member states. And that's practically all of the states. Now, when I tested for 17 years ago, there were 28 states that were members, and the other states joined later. I believe now it's like 40 something states. It's almost all the states are part of the National Center for States Court, and that's the exam that's been administered. So yes, it is reciprocal. So you can, and we often get people that transfer. Actually, last week I worked with somebody who went from New York to North Carolina and now is working in Maryland. And don't have to test again. You're certified in one state, the certification is valid in the others. Are the hours usually regular business hours? Sorry, Catherine, the questions are coming so fast. I'm going back to your questions. I didn't miss to not answer. I just missed a couple. I'm going back to answer everybody. Okay, are the hours usually regular business hours? Usually. I mean, prime hours for court. The most request is in the morning. There's usually morning and afternoon. In some busier courts, it's all day. For example, in DC, because there's high volume, they hire you full day. All the rest of the state of Maryland, which is adjacent basically, and that's why people travel sometimes to DC, living in Baltimore, like I did for a while. Not every day, but I would take 4 or 5 days a month in DC because they hire me full day. Um, so in other places they hire you half day where they have a high volume, and the hours are typically court hours for court, and that is starting at 8:30 in most places, 9. Sometimes they say, well, there's a hearing program at 11. Different courthouses have different schedules, but prime time is morning time. Afternoon is not that busy in many places. And also you can work after hours. I do take sometimes assignments on weekends. Now that I'm working as a staff interpreter, I still do some freelancing. So um, if some attorney is willing to go visit a client in jail on a Saturday morning, if he's willing to accommodate so that I can take the assignment, because some people used to work with me and now say, well, can you come? They still want to continue working with me, and I'm busy in court at the hours that I used to go to the jail. So say, okay, can you do it after hours? Can you do it at 4:30? Can you do it at 5? Can you do it on Saturday? So if they're willing to accommodate, I go after hours. Court hours and depositions are usually regular business hours, but occasionally there are things that can be scheduled if the parties are willing on Saturdays, like I say, jail visits, depositions, interviews, like probation and people that work on regular hours would not accommodate on a weekend, but private attorneys will, and so will sometimes psychologists, people who are called to do assessments or evaluations. I had people sometimes travel from one state to the other, experts, to interview somebody, say, in a jail facility. And they would do that on weekends. So I hope I answered that. Okay, and this is not a question, but somebody said, Catherine, you're doing great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I hope I can help you. I really appreciate it. I'm a full-time court interpreter now, and I said I quit teaching for this, but once a teacher, always a teacher. So in fact, I miss teaching, and that's why I decided to combine my two careers, my two loves. I trained to be a teacher really, and so I'm trying to combine both. And I have taught medical interpreting and community interpreting and court interpreting, and I just decided to do it a little bit more formally online so that I can also meet the need, and I hope some people would accommodate to my schedules too. Unfortunately, I can only do this on weekends and a couple of late evenings. So that's what I can offer so far, because I'm not going to quit my staff position to teach, but I love teaching. And I hope I can help you and whoever has a serious interest in this profession, which I really love, and I want to see more professionals into it. So hope I help you. Um, if there are no more questions, I'm going to sign off, but I'll wait a couple minutes to see if something else comes up. Let me go back. I missed something. Mil gracias por su información. Gracias, Miss Villar. Gracias, Catherine. And when are the classes you offer? The classes are posted on my webpage. So I have all the schedules for this year. I may be able to squeeze something in, some other intensive course at the end of the year, because some people are sitting for the exam in December and may want something in November. But other than that, everything is posted. So I have class starting for Code Interpreting 1, 12 weeks starting on June the 10th, on Saturdays at 11. An intensive course for those sitting for the exam in June, 2-week course starting the 5th of June, that will be every day for those sitting for the exam in June. It's something I just added because I was at a conference recently with the National Association of Court Interpreters, and coordinator told me there are people that are sitting for the exam in June and may want to do something faster. I wasn't really planning for something that soon, but now I included it. So if you're sitting for June, you can do the intensive course. If not, I recommend starting with stage 1, level 1. June 10th is the first. There's going to be another level 1 starting in September. And for those who complete level 1 that starts in June, in September they can take level 2, and then in January level 3. So after each level there's a continuation to the next level. But I will be opening another level 1 in September. Catherine, so should I just email you when I'm ready to start, or do you have starting dates? I think I just answered that. I do have starting dates. You just have to sign up, let me know. Okay. And go to the web page, please. I think you have it, and I have you in my email list. So you will be receiving information from me unless you unsubscribe. You don't want to hear from me anymore. I won't take offense. Just unsubscribe. Otherwise, you're on my list and you will be getting information. Okay? Hope to be ready in September. All right. Hope so too. Hope to meet again. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you for your interest. I really appreciate it. I'll be signing off.